Very pleased to have with us on the program right now Washington Times reporter Emily Miller. Emily, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.
It's my pleasure. Always.
Listen, you have been a very busy lady this week, testifying before the D.C. City Council about your experience in trying to become a legal gun owner and talking about some of the problems that you have run into. Tell us again, how did it come about that you testified before the City Council on this issue?
Well, it was a public hearing, and someone, a active, I'd say, lawyer in this industry, in the firearms industry, said you should testify if you want. Would you want to? And I was like, are you kidding me? I've tried to get Phil Mendelson to sit down and interview with me for months, and he refuses to talk to me. But at a public hearing, he has to listen. So I was kind of surprised that they put me at the top of the witness list. But it was pretty clear that a lot of the stuff in his legislation is coming directly from the complaints I'm making in my stories. And I talked to Police Chief Lanier afterwards, and she said she'd been reading everything, and they had been following through on some of the suggestions I've made. So, I mean, I was thrilled to hear this, that my voice is getting heard. But as I said to Mendelson in the grilling that he gave me, that it really is ridiculous that I have to keep writing stories to tell them all the stuff that's going wrong in their gun laws here, that they should really just be a little bit more open-minded to what people are saying.
Well, I think going back to the Heller decision, I don't think the City Council has demonstrated a bit of open-mindedness. I mean, they said, after the handgun ban and storage requirements were struck down, that they basically wanted to make the new laws as restrictive as they possibly could, and they're willing to face litigation over this again. They're willing to face complaints. What strikes me, Emily, is that while you're describing how difficult it is to be a legal gun owner in Washington, D.C., you've got people who are pointing to the low number of legal gun owners in Washington, D.C., and they're saying, well, look, this proves that most people in Washington, D.C. don't want to be a gun owner because there have been so few people who have actually gone through the process.
Okay, you just hit on the part of the I would say interrogation that I got from Mendelson, and if people are interested, they can go to my website, thewashingtontimes.com/blog/guns, and you can watch the testimony and the Q&A. And the part that made me almost want to jump up onto his big high stage and punch him was when he kept saying to me that nobody wants guns in this city. That he said the culture had changed during the 30-year ban, and that nobody in D.C. wanted guns, and that's why there was a low registration. And I said to him, sir, and he pointed to there was a 9-month period after Heller, before they got the laws put in place, where there was no registration, and there was no, which I explained to him, $465 in fees that we have to pay.
Right.
Which he did not deny that. And he said, well, he said, Ms. Miller, look, we had for 9 months, we didn't have a rush of people registering. And I said, I think it's really unfair. Well, he said 3/4 of a year. And I said, well, sir, in 9 months, after a 30-year gun ban, I don't think a lot of people understood, first of all, that the ban had been lifted, or secondly, how to go through the process. And he said, well, there's been so much public relations about this and so many media reports. It's ridiculous if nobody knows this. And I said, look, I'm a journalist. And when I went in October to start this process, I didn't understand how it worked. I still don't understand how it worked. And I held up the 22-page registration packet, and I said, I'm still reading through this thing to understand how it works. And he still didn't believe me. He said, no, people aren't registering because they don't want it. I said, people aren't registering because it's a whole lot cheaper, a whole lot easier, and a lot less frustrating to get a gun illegally. And people in the city, that's what they're doing. They're getting their guns illegally. If you want them to go through your registration process, then you might as well lower the fees and lower the hassles. Otherwise, and he said, no, they're not. They're not. He was in such denial. And I said, look, sir, all gun sales, gun ownership is at the highest rates they've ever been. Mm-hmm. And women gun ownership is the highest rates it's ever been. And firearm sales have been exploding in the past few years. Well, he said to me, that's not true. And he said, well, is that in D.C.? And I said, well, no, because obviously first of all, firearms aren't sold in D.C., and secondly, no one's done a poll in D.C., so you can only look at national numbers. Well, then a couple of panels after me, they bring up this guy from the Brady group or whatever, and he says gun ownership has gone down dramatically in the past few years. And so Mendelsohn was thrilled. He said, well, that directly contradicts what Ms. Miller was saying. And so they have, who knows what some of their studies come from. I'm sure they're funded by the Brady Group. And so Mendelsohn went really into that and said, well, that explains it. What it is just a few people are getting a lot of guns, which is upping the numbers. I mean, they just can't hear it. I mean, it's just fact. And he kept saying to me, well, Ms. Miller, how do you prove that people want to buy guns, or people want guns in this city? And I said, well, I can tell you anecdotally that people tell me that they would get a gun if it wasn't so expensive and so difficult.
Right.
I was like, I can also look at the national numbers and tell you gun ownership is up everywhere. And I said, I think it would be awfully odd, Mr. Chairman, if gun ownership was up in the entire country except for this one city. And none of this, he and the Brady guy just stuck with their point of view. So I get to put my written testimony in after the fact. So I'm working on a document to give him a bunch of the statistics. Who knows if he'll pay attention. But it's, what frustrated me is how can I prove demand if I'm not given the opportunity? And I said, one other thing I said to him, I said, look, well, if you had a shooting range in D.C., you would probably make a ton of money, and people would be going to it and using it, but you won't let that. And that, pretty much ended that part of the conversation.
So
that's just never going to happen. And he said, you don't know that. It probably wouldn't make any money.
Probably. I mean, boy, again, wow. Talk about.
I know. I mean, really, it was such a wow. I couldn't believe what I was dealing with, and I thought he's lived in this cave of liberalism that you just don't want to hear anything else.
Right.
All I wanted to do was say, and he's persisted in this argument. He's sending, a lot of people have been sending him emails on my behalf, which I appreciate, and putting in their 2 cents after watching the testimony. And he's been emailing them back and saying that he doesn't want to change the registration process because then gun crime will increase. It doesn't make any sense. The people who are registering are law-abiding citizens. Gun crime are coming from the bad guys who are not registering their guns.
We've talked with Chris Bauman, who's the head of the police union.
He's great.
He's fantastic. And he's told us that they've never, as far as he can tell, they've never had a crime in which a gun from a legal gun owner in Washington, D.C. was used. In fact, he said that, he thinks these regulations are ridiculous, that the council is spending so much time trying to regulate the legal possession of firearms while they are soft on criminals, and they are, doing absolutely nothing about the violent people who are illegally using firearms, using knives, using whatever implement, to commit bodily harm against others and to commit violent crimes in the District of Columbia. The council is so much more interested in going after people like you, Emily.
It's really shocking the amount of time, effort, and resources. And frankly, and actually I had a story today in the paper, and I talked to, as you were just talking about, Chris Bowman, who's fantastic about the same thing, because what I uncovered yesterday, this just blows my mind. Several times in this hearing, the idea of the re-registration came up. And I was sort of unclear on this, and I did some research, talked to Chief Lanier's office, went through the law, the original law, and what it turns out is that in the original law, D.C. requires that every gun owner, the new gun owners post-Heller, and all the long gun owners since whenever, which is estimated at 60,000, will have to re-register every single one of their guns every 3 years and pay the fees. And it's several documents you have to provide to do that. And you have to come down to the police station every 6 years to get re-fingerprinted. So the kicker to this is this law said that the police department, in order to get people to do this, had to send out notices on December 31st, 2001, and all the citizens had to send them back by today, or everyone is in violation of the gun laws. And so the police never send it out because Lanier and her staff have said we don't have the resources. From what I understand, they're tracking all these guns on index cards. Like they don't have any software system, nothing. They can't do it. So by virtue of the fact they can't do it, several people have gone to registration and said, I know I need to re-register. How do I do it? And they're not told any direction. So as of today, all the gun owners who've had guns before March of 2009 are in violation of the gun laws. And Bowman said he's the head of the D.C. Union.
Right.
He was like, his point, exactly what you were just saying, is that this is such a waste of resources. Like, you have a whole new computer system and how many people to do this, whereas we have serious crime in this city going up all the time, and this is what they're worrying about.
It's unbelievable, but this is the attitude. I mean, they really think that if they just pass another law, if they pass another regulation, another restriction on those who actually follow the law, that is somehow going to make a difference or make some incredible impact on the violent crime in Washington, D.C. It's one of the many reasons why I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Emily, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the program tonight. We are almost out of time, but I'd love to have you back because it sounds like this saga is not over and it's going to be going on.
From over. And I'll tell you, Cam, I thought I was just going to do this until I got my gun, and I'm still in my waiting period right now, my 10-day waiting period. I'm not. This is not going to end for me until I see these laws changed. I'm determined now.
Emily, thank you again. Emily Miller from the Washington Times with us here on Cam and Company.